Environmental Health Department of Montana State University. I'm here on campus in Bozeman and Taylor Hall. I've been here for about 5 years. I'm primarily funded by EPA to do pollution prevention outreach work in EPA's Region 8, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. My position here is fairly broad in scope, and it's really only been within the last few years that we began, when we began an initiative called E3, which stands for the Economy, Energy, and Environment. It's a multi-federal agency initiative, and we took that initiative and initiatives framework, and we are piloting that approach in Montana agriculture. Basically, what we're doing is a number of different energy efficiency, pollution prevention assessments and audits with our agricultural producers across the state. And this has really been the first opportunity I've had to work directly with agents, and it has been really exciting and wonderful. Today we are going to hear about a very cool, very comprehensive project that MSU Extension has worked on with the University of Wyoming Extension, which was exploring the potential of small hydropower at existing water infrastructure. So this project began a few years back with Sarah Hamlin. She was heading up that effort on our end, on MSU's end, and this project is now mostly complete. It's certainly complete from the Wyoming end, but we'd like to just see if we can interest anyone here in Extension in this project, and then perhaps participating in some of the outreach that could be involved with this handbook, perhaps a co-authorship to kind of tweak the guidebook a little bit to reflect our Montana priorities, and perhaps a Mont Guide publication. So if that's of interest to any of you, please let me know. This is a webinar format, so all of the attendees are muted at the moment, but we're happy to take questions at the end through the chat pane, and also after our presentation, for sure, you can be in touch with myself or Milt Geiger, who's about to talk to us about the project. And my contact information is located right here that you can see is mila.kelly@montana.edu or 994-6948. Milt will show his contact information in a moment. But with that, I think we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Milt Geiger, who is the energy specialist, I hope I got that right, Milt, at University of Wyoming Extension, and he's going to tell us about this handbook, how it was developed, and how it might be useful for you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mila. And yes, I am the energy specialist. I'm actually in the Department of Ag and Applied Economics here at the University of Wyoming, and I work both for UW Extension and our School of Energy Resources. And before I get going on what's in the handbook and the potential to engage, I just wanted to give a little background on the project. So there's a very similar document that is, uniquely named the Wyoming Small Hydropower Handbook, and this is a effort that actually is also very similar to the Colorado Small Hydropower Handbook. Colorado published theirs several years ago. It was a very expensive endeavor. And here in Wyoming, we went and wrangled up some funding from our state energy office, and then we worked jointly with Montana State to develop a guide, and it was written by an engineering firm, Wenck and Associates, so we actually had some water engineers be the primary authors. So it's very similar to the Wyoming guide, but obviously with some unique chapters relative to Montana. So that's a little overview of where it came from. So let's get started as far as what's in it and an overview of the product, and then your opportunities to engage. Okay, so the products. So you see that there is a Montana Small Hydropower Handbook. It's in a draft stage. It's been reviewed, edited. It just really needs a Montana author to put it through the MSU Mont Guide process. I believe that's what you call your bulletins up there. I think they're Mont Guides. And so there is, in the handbook, by the way, it's a lengthy document. It's over 70 pages. I believe the Montana one is 78 pages. And then the other thing that comes with it is there is also a video series, and we'll see. I'll just give you a little bit of overview. This is just the intro. There's about 9 videos that go along with it that can generally be used in Montana as well as in Wyoming. Obviously the header would change for this, but our media folks tell me that's no problem. So let's learn a little bit about the guide here.
If you've ever pondered water flowing through an irrigation canal or over a diversion dam and wondered, can I generate electricity with that? Well, then the Small Hydropower Handbook is for you. The handbook and its associated summary address developing small hydropower at existing water infrastructure. It does not focus on developing dams on natural waterways. The Hydropower Handbook covers hydropower basics, how to evaluate your resource, the all-important permitting and licensing, power markets, incentives, and then offers real-world examples of systems. The full handbook and the shorter summary allow water users to make informed decisions about whether small hydropower is an option on their existing water infrastructure. It focuses on the technical feasibility, but most importantly, the economic viability of these potential projects.
Okay, thank you for indulging me with the video there. I'm always reminded that I definitely have a face for radio, but we did go through that process and the engineers are involved as well. So in addition to the videos, like I said, you do have your own handbook. This is who it's prepared by. Obviously, the final output would have some Montana State authorship on there. And what have we done with it in Wyoming? Just some examples. We've actually gone out and done a road show with quite a bit of success where we sat down with producers that got great coverage in the media. This is our statewide paper, just an example of an article there. And we had real sit-down conversation. We recognize that this is a very niche topic. Not everybody is going to have falling water flowing across their property, be it an irrigation district, a municipality, whoever. But we did have some very engaged audiences in these discussions. And we also have a website that has been receiving an impressive amount of traffic where we break the guide down into smaller sections, really make it different web pages in addition to be able to link to the PDF documents. So that's what we've done with it in Wyoming. That's sort of the what. So this is what Montana has as well, that core piece being the information provided in that handbook. And the goal of this, of course, so it's nice to develop a product, but what are we looking to do for our water users and oftentimes our traditional ag clients? Well, one, we want to lower the transaction costs and the development, fostering the development of new projects or purposeful inaction. Remember, we're extension, so I'm not an advocate for small hydropower. We just want to make sure that those who may have this resource have access to the information. And why hydropower is a unique opportunity for development where it's very appropriate for extension to be involved is the fact that many water users, this will be a one-off development in their lifetime. It's not like it's a photovoltaic array or something like that where you put in one and it can be very similar installation right next door. Most water users, we'll say an irrigation district, have been looking at this falling water for many years and will really just be developing it once. We don't get those economies of scale, so we want to make it more approachable for water users to explore their resource, and thus the handbook. It sort of allows them to do a pre-feasibility study before going into the full-blown feasibility study if merit exists there. And once again, we also acknowledge that if people make informed decision not to proceed, that they should just let the water flow by, which in many cases will be what occurs with small hydropower. Extension's also done their job as well. So that's the what and the deliverables there. Okay, so what is small hydropower? For the purposes of this guide, based upon some regulatory parameters, we call small hydropower less than 5 megawatts of generating capacity. By the way, for the folks who don't regularly converse in megawatts, a megawatt's a fair amount of electricity. You're looking at a couple thousand homes with a 2 to 3 megawatt system. So this is not an inconsequential resource when you get into those megawatt ranges. And we really divide two classes of hydro, small hydro and micro hydro. And really where we make the delineation is a small hydro plant is where the user or the water user is actually selling that electricity into the market, either trying to generate revenue from the sale of electricity from an already working water resource. Well, when we look at micro hydro, it's generally less than 100 kilowatts of generating capacity. That's a definition from the Department of Energy. And it's designed to offset your own consumption. Think of a net metered system, and I know in Montana you have sort of unique laws based upon what type of utility you have. So that's somewhere between that 10 and 50 kilowatt range in Montana. But in this case, if we put it in the ag context, small hydros like growing hay to sell it to somebody else, and micro hydros like growing hay to feed it to your own livestock. So we recognize that there are two different classes of resources, they're both discussed, but we really focused on that small hydro component, primarily because one of our funders down here in Wyoming, like I mentioned, was the Wyoming Business Council, and they looked at this as an economic development opportunity for our ag producers in rural municipalities. So a little bit more about what is small hydro. This is what it is not. This is my one graphic that does not come from the guide, so I promise this is not in the Montana Small Hydropower Handbook. But hydropower is not that. I am both a novice electrician and plumber, and I've never even created anything like that. So let's just be clear that when we have small hydropower, that's not what we're talking about. But when we get back to the big picture here, so the where and the how. So if we have these resources, we're either selling in the market or offsetting your own consumption. And we saw from that intro video that we're focusing on existing resources. So what are those existing resources and what do they look like? Well, if you'll indulge me being a movie star again, we'll play you just a little video that shows an example of a small hydropower system in Buffalo, Wyoming.
To many Wyomingites, hydropower conjures up images of giant dams on the North Platte or Wind River. But hydropower comes in many sizes. Small hydropower, where a system produces enough electricity from 1 to several hundred homes, is seeing increased interest. Here at the municipally owned Buffalo Hydroelectric Facility, raw water is diverted from Clear Creek on its way to the water treatment plant. The town of Buffalo cost-effectively installed a hydroelectric turbine to reduce pressure before the water enters the treatment plant. The amount of energy that can be extracted from water depends upon the head, which is the elevation the water falls, and the flow, or the amount of water. The Buffalo facility has a capacity of 225 kilowatts, which powers nearly 200 typical homes. The average flow of 6.3 cubic feet per second falls the equivalent of 530 vertical feet. Other entities across Wyoming also use small hydro. Lower Valley Energy, a rural electric cooperative in the western part of the state, operates 2 small hydroelectric facilities. New small hydroelectric systems are being considered at places where water infrastructure already exists, meaning no new dams. Wyoming's working waters can do more than just provide a cold drink or irrigate alfalfa. Many can also produce a significant amount of electricity. From the University of Wyoming Extension, I'm Milton Geiger, exploring the nature of Wyoming.
And that series, by the way, is part of a regular, the Exploring Nature of Wyoming series is something that we regularly do for television down here in Wyoming. We just happened to talk about the small hydro. So we were simply attempting to give you a view of what does a small hydropower plant look like. So that once again was a 225 kilowatt system on the municipal water supply for the town of Buffalo at the foot of the Bighorn Mountains. You could certainly have many, many examples like that in Montana. Okay, so where and how? Where are we focusing? Where is this targeted product? Where is it being delivered to? And you can see that there's some key areas here. And if we look to certain images that go with this, but municipal water systems, think of folks that take their water from high in the mountains and bring it down to their users. There's often excess head, and sometimes this is dissipated in something called a pressure reducing valve. So where they have those pressure reducing valves, oftentimes a hydro turbine will do the same thing. It will extract energy, mechanical energy out of the water and convert it to electricity. Other opportunities are canal drops. Some of those have been profiled by the Bureau of Reclamation when it's on a bureau project, but where you have existing water infrastructure, and because these are seasonal water infrastructure, one that may negatively impact the economics is not running year-round, but it also makes the environmental impact less. If there's not water in it for 5-6 months out of the year, you're less likely to have aquatic species, aquatic organism impacts. And those are detailed at length in the Montana Small Hydropower Handbook. Also, non-powered dams, only 1% to 2% of the dams in the U.S. are powered. Most of them are not suitable for power. Think of that dam way up in the national forest, a long ways away from a load, or those itty-bitty diversion dams. They just don't make sense to power, but in certain cases there are some dams that have the opportunity to cost-effectively have electrical generation installed on them. And other sort of niche opportunities that targets some of our traditional landowner extension clientele is hydromechanical. There you're not even generating electricity. It is actually just mechanical, but you're turning center pivots with the mechanical energy of water. So think of an inverse pump or something like that. This has become quite prevalent down in Colorado. There's some systems in Utah. You may have some in Montana. We were not able to find examples in Wyoming. But it is a great use of excess head. It's sort of taking an irrigation system beyond the next step of pressurization to actually extracting the mechanical energy to turn the pivots, especially as things are converted from gated pipe to pivots. And like I mentioned earlier, micro hydropower, and this could be anything from a rural homeowner with an artesian well up a hill, or an artesian spring that flows downhill, to opportunities for small systems to be installed as part of an irrigation district or the like. So all these are opportunities of the where that we were focusing on with that handbook. So this is the ultimate audience. Okay, and moving along, don't see any questions in the chat box, but just so you don't think that it's too simple, here's a small hydro development flowchart, and it's put together by the Colorado Energy Office out of their small hydropower handbook, where you really look at what goes into this and where the guide comes into play. And we start with that site assessment. People need to understand their resource. So often people want to overestimate the amount of energy that's available in falling water. They think about it in June when the snow's melting, and they see this water roaring by, and they think, wow, I wish I could do something with that. And they overestimate both the flow and the head. So a lot of it is just a basic physics, like how much energy could you produce with your resource? Then taking you to the feasibility study, and this is really the sweet spot. We want to get into that pre-feasibility study with this guide. What are the key questions to ask? What are the process? If someone explains or tells me that I need this type of turbine, what does that mean? And it's just a one-stop shop with additional resources as far as how to evaluate a project. And then there is a little bit on there that takes it all the way through the permitting, and that's why we're having this conversation right now, by the way. Permitting has gotten much easier with some regulatory reform passed by Congress almost 2 years ago, where FERC no longer has to grant a license or an exemption for small hydro projects if they meet certain parameters, such as being on an existing conduit. And the details of that are explained in the handbook. The Bureau of Reclamation also simplified their lease of power privilege, and it really reduces that transaction cost. Remember how I said this is a one-off installation? And so often if you have to bear the transaction costs on a small project the exact same way you would on a large project, the small project would never get constructed. Well, fortunately, permitting has gotten much easier. We talk about interconnection. Just because you have access to power lines does not mean that there's capacity on there. The nuances of working with investor-owned utilities, rural electrics are all discussed, and including the aspect of what are you going to get paid for it, so the finance. Where are you going to get the capital? These are capital intense. And how are you going to sell your product? If you take it to the ag setting, it's of no good to grow a crop that you can't sell. And uniquely, in many cases, you're growing a crop, in this case, electricity, that you can sell to very few entities. So it makes a unique negotiating process. There's very few utilities out there that have the ability to buy this. But once again, it is something that is an added value to that already working water. So we talk about finance, incentives matter. We'll touch on that in just a bit more. And then the final design and construction. This handbook is not designed to simply to provide the design for a small hydropower system. It's designed, the handbook itself will get you to the point where if a project is seemingly viable after a full feasibility study, that's when you go out and get the water engineers to actually get it done. And then, hey, commissioning, get to hold that ribbon-cutting event and tell the media that you're doing great things. Okay, so that's an overview of small hydropower and how the handbook approaches small hydropower. So why now or why not? Well, let's give a sort of a pitch and then a counterbalance to why we want to talk about small hydro and extension. Well, like I mentioned, that reduced regulatory burden improves the feasibility to produce a premium product. You're producing green energy. Generally, these are low-impact hydro certifiable projects. And we know that in the marketplace, folks are demanding electrons that are wearing a green hat. So this is an opportunity for a product to be produced that may have additional value, and it certainly has additional value if you're already putting that water to work as an irrigation district or a municipality. So that's what we're looking to do, simply add value in a rural setting. But what are those challenges? Well, awareness, first of all, the understanding of folks that have access to this resource, that they could be developed, and the access to capital. So let's talk for a moment about some federal and state incentives. because they exist, but they do matter, but entity type matters as well. And this is where it gets really confusing for hydro, even more so than other renewable energy systems, and why it's useful to have extension present to help steer people at least in the right direction as you evaluate that pre-feasibility. Your entity type matters. If you're a public ownership, say an irrigation district or municipality, and you're non-taxable, well, it means you can get some incentives, but you can't get others. Private ownership, non-taxable, think rural electric co-ops, can access another pot of money. And indeed, private ownership that are taxable, like an LLC or something else, can get a separate pot of money. So there's really 3 tracks that entities could take. And determining what type of entity should own the system up front could be a very key part of that pre-feasibility analysis. And then when you look at incentives, both state and federal level, there's some. Those are just a couple for Montana that we hold up there. The Renewable Resource Grant and Loan Program, the Alternative Energy Revolving Loan Program could both theoretically be used for hydro. But on the federal, there is a production tax credit. It too starts and stops, lapses and returns, and it's about half the level of wind. So it may or may not make sense for a project. Natural Resource Conservation Service could theoretically help ag producers on a micro hydro system, although this is sort of nuanced. Certainly those hydromechanical systems could be eligible. USDA Rural Development with their Rural Energy for America program. Hydro is now eligible. It was not always eligible under that program. But a for-profit entity or a co-op, so remember that incentive, the entity type matters, could get a USDA rural development 25% grant or guaranteed loan. And then if you're a Bureau of Reclamation project, well, there are some other opportunities as well to seek financing. So what is this telling you? This is just pulling out one chapter of the handbook and say, guess what? It's a bit confusing, so it's good for Extension to be able to offer a resource to shepherd people through the process. Okay, so what are the challenges? Well, we mentioned that scale. These are smaller scale projects that have to go through much of the rigmarole of a larger scale project. They have to go out and negotiate a power purchase agreement. Utilities may be less agreeable to give a higher rate because, hey, it's a small amount of electricity. In their scheme of things, it could be a very large amount of electricity to those water users that are producing this. The ownership structure matters, and also something we have to temper the expectations. These projects can move along, but they can take time. It's water. In the West, people like to fight about water, and it has gotten simpler, but the anticipation for a rapid rate of return, extremely rapid rate of return, or extremely rapid progress on a project often has to be tempered. These can be viable projects that are financially sound, but it has to all be taken within the context of the resource. So those are some unique challenges that we have. And the other big one, especially what's unique in Wyoming, and it's especially unique in Montana, but the power markets. And this has been the big hang-up on projects, actually. We've seen a decline in the wholesale price of electricity, generally due to some nuances with declining demand. Uniquely, we haven't seen a decline in the retail price of electricity. But what is that product worth in a deregulated, and that matter in a regulated power market? Who can you sell it to? Who's willing to buy it? Is that the big hang-up? And admittedly, in Wyoming, that is a big hang-up right now. If folks are familiar with avoided cost rates, our avoided cost rates have plummeted. They've dropped by nearly 40–50% in the last 3 years. So a project that was being considered 3 years ago, all of a sudden its product where you sign a 20-year power purchase agreement is worth 60% of what you anticipated it to be. So that's a unique challenge. And then also those renewable energy credits. I mentioned that these electrons are wearing a green hat. That could have value in the marketplace, but it is up to the projects and the utility to determine who captures that. So those are your sources of revenue, and hey, money talks. A lot of things are technically feasible, but we have to make sure it's financially feasible for our water users. Okay, now let's step back and say, how can we engage MSU Extension in this process? Why didn't UW just turn out a handbook from Wyoming and leave it be? One, when we worked in cooperation, we were able to get an engineering firm to write this for us by pooling our resources. But we also want Montana engagement. So what do we need? We need a Montana State University co-author for the entire handbook, and there's an associated summary that goes with it. Should we say the abridged version that trends it down to 4 pages, sort of the customary Extension Bulletin Mont Guide style. And we also need local connections to lead engagement and outreach. This can be a very useful tool to a very niche audience, and that presents a challenge. You're not just going to hold a workshop and have 50 people show up for general interest, but you may have 10 people show up that are very interested in this. And many of us who do extension work would much rather have those 10 people that are very interested. So those are what we need from Montana State. And the guide's ready to go. It just needs to be slightly tweaked for Montana. One last review up there, and then you guys can put your stamp on it. So what do you get out of that? Well, you get one more step, and that is, if you look on the bottom there, you insert your name here. You could be an author. It's a quick applied publication to pick up, and you can sort of take ownership of this. It isn't going to be an issue that dominates all of your time, but it's certainly an area of expertise that can be built by somebody in Montana State University Extension. And right there, you see that this guide, I've actually tweaked it for Montana, but we want to make sure that it has Montana State University Extension owns it. It just doesn't want to be a product that they have. We want to make sure that you have the resources that if somebody reads it, they know who they need to contact, and they need to know how to follow up with that. And that was the goal when the project was originally conceived over 2 years ago. So with that, I've given you a little whirlwind tour of the Montana Small Hydropower Handbook. And I hope that somebody out there from Montana State would like to engage in this process, because we certainly think that it's a useful resource for your water users in the state, and we look forward to working with our partners at Montana State on this type of project. So with that, Mila, I don't know if you've been keeping track of anything. Do we have any questions that have come in?
Well, that is great, Milt. Thank you so much. And I wanted to say that well, it was an excellent summary of what is in the Hydro handbook, and I have taken a look through it, and it's very well written and very comprehensive. So it's a great product. I wanted to mention that we are recording this presentation, so if anyone missed parts of the presentation and want to view it, I will send out the link probably tomorrow or the next day on where the recording is, so you can take a look at it and review it. We'll also send that link on to the rest of Extension in case anyone was not able to attend today but is interested in the process. And I think with that, I haven't seen any questions, Milt, so I think, did you have anything else to add? Or I guess just your contact information is down there. You might have, let's see, you want to just throw out your email address, which I don't.
Sure, and easy to find with a quick Google search, but it is just M Geiger, Geiger, and the numeral 1 at uyo.edu. I promise I'm pretty easy to track down if you look for me.
Great. So if you have any questions, you can let myself or Milt know, and we'll send out the link to this webinar, and we'll go on from there, and hopefully we'll get some MSU engagement on this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for hosting me today, Mila, and I look forward to working with you as wrap this project up and get a deliverable to your water users up in Montana.
Excellent. Thanks, Milt. Thanks, everybody who attended, and we'll have a good day.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.